Alright, it's bonus video time. Hello everyone, it is November. We are here again. Thank you all for voting. And this month we had a tie for the first time since I expanded the eligibility for voting. So we had 171 votes, and the top two were the every iteration of Wings, my opinion on that, and my trip to the USA. In that situation where there is a tie, I become the tie-breaking vote, and I went with my trip. Sorry if that's a selfish choice, but you know, the further I get from this trip, the less relevant it's going to seem, so I chose that one. I'll talk about Wings again. I'm going to put them back into next month's poll, don't you worry, until it gets selected. Maybe it'll become an in-joke, but I'm just going to leave that in the poll because it's been popular the last two times. It's come second the last two times, and you know what was also popular was that Beach Boys one, the topic where I choose my favorite song off every album. Great idea, that one. So this video will be a little different. I don't think I've made one like this since my my Beatles pilgrimage to Liverpool a couple of years ago. So look, I appreciate that so many of you care enough to want to hear about my my trip to the US. I imagine many of you who voted are American yourself, although maybe not. And I did have a couple of people mention that they live in America and they're kind of burnt out on their country at the moment, so they picked the Wings option, which I totally understand. But don't worry, I'm gonna keep this fairly light and entertaining. I mean, I hope it'll be entertaining. So I was in the US between October 18th and November 7th. I'm just editing this and I realized I don't say at the start here where I'm actually going. So yeah, road trip in California, starting from LA to San Francisco with stops along the way, and then flying over to New York for about a week or so there. So that's the trip. And it was also my first trip that I've ever taken overseas or otherwise, I believe, completely by myself. I've traveled many times with friends and with my girlfriend, and during those times I've had the odd day or two by myself, but this was the first intentionally solo trip I've ever taken, and I really loved it. Some people ask me like, oh, don't you get lonely at all? And no, honestly, I've gotten pretty good at enjoying my own company over the years. I'm very content just being by myself. I spend a lot of time by myself at school. I'm a YouTuber without any, colleagues, so I work by myself. It's second nature to me. Really makes me sound like I have absolutely no friends. I did see plenty of people on my trip. Yeah, there was definitely a broad collection of folks that I made contact with on my journey, and I'm glad I did because connecting with actual Americans was a big part of why I wanted to visit America, specifically during this period. Just a bit of background on me is that I have always had a deep love of Americana. You know, music, jeans, Coca-Cola, like all that shit. As an Australian kid, it really makes an impact on you. You know, I'm young, I'm falling in love with movies, I want to be an actor, and I learned that all the movies are made in this magical place called the United States of America. Even before that, when I was really little and watching my favorite show, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I became obsessed with going to New York and eating a slice of cheese pizza just so I could be like my favorite four guys. My other favorite four guys before the main other four guys came along. Like growing up, the major sport you play in the summertime in Australia or England is cricket, right? Well, I was the one weirdo who wanted to play baseball. So this was going to be my fifth time in America. I hadn't been back since 2016, and a lot has changed since September of 2016 when I went. But what are the three main reasons that I really wanted to go to America right now? Specifically right now, this period. One of them is the autumn leaves. Australia doesn't have really much in the way of deciduous native trees. We have to import them and pretend that our autumn is as beautiful as anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. So to actually go to a place where beautiful deciduous trees drop their leaves and change color is just, that's really delightful for me. So yeah, that's reason number one. Reason number two is Halloween. I know it might sound silly to you guys in the States, but you really don't know how good you've got it as far as Halloween goes. Australia started adopting trick-or-treating when I was a kid, but it's just not the same. It doesn't have the juice of an American Halloween. And when I looked at the best cities to experience Halloween, the top two entries were San Francisco and New York, aka the city I would be in the week leading up to Halloween and the city I would be in on Halloween itself. And the third reason that I wanted to go during this period was the election. Don't worry, like I said, I'm not going to make this video political or anything, but I will say now, I do identify more as a progressive left-leaning voter in Australia, so you probably have an idea who I was hoping would win the election. But look, regardless of the victor, I was just curious to be in the land of the free during what I would call the wildest campaign in history. And I wanted to be in the US for the finale of it, I suppose. I left the US on the 7th, 2 days after voting day. My main concern was that the election wouldn't be called by the time I left. You know, like 2021 took like 4 or 5 days, so I was worried that it wouldn't be wrapped up. It turned out that wasn't a concern, but this was all part of what made this trip very fascinating to me. You know, the people I met along the way in the lead up to it, a lot of them were very tense. Some of them were very concerned. And, you know, I had some fascinating chats with a lot of people at this odd sort of turning point in history. It feels like we're at a bit of a strange nexus point. Of course, based on the places I visited, I was in somewhat of a liberal bubble, but nonetheless, the whole thing fascinated me, and it is for those reasons that I left for the US. Oh, and the other thing about this trip is that I had never driven a car in a different country before, which normally wouldn't be a big deal in England or Japan, where they also drive on the left-hand side of the road like Australia, but Americans drive on the right. So that was actually the thing that was making me the most nervous. A shift to the right. Particularly because I boarded a 13.5-hour flight at 11:30 a.m. my time on the 18th and landed at 8 a.m. LA time, also on the 18th because of the time difference, and I didn't sleep on the plane. So I've essentially gone like a whole night without sleep, and then it's the equivalent of 6 in the morning for me, and I'm hopping in a car at LAX that I've never driven before on roads that are completely unfamiliar to me, and everything is the opposite. But what actually messed with my head was not driving on the other side of the road, but that the steering wheel is on the other side of the car. It's on the top. No, it's on the it's on the left side of the car in America. It's on the right-hand side of the car in Australia. So I'm driving on the highway thinking I've got plenty of space on my right, but really my wheels are fully in the lane next to me. So like, it was an adjustment. Luckily, nothing bad happened. Don't worry. I got everywhere I needed to go in one piece. So my initial plan was to drive not from LAX to Hollywood, where my hotel was, but to Hawthorne, which was only a 9-minute drive from the airport. The reason I wanted to go to Hawthorne was because it's the birthplace of the Beach Boys, and also it would mean I had a nearby place to stop if the driving was like freaking me out. So I was like, okay, great, 2 birds, 1 stone. So after a scary but thrilling drive along LA's labyrinthine roads, I ended up outside the shabby looking side of the freeway where the home of Brian, Dennis, and Carl Wilson used to be. There's now an historic landmark there, which is what I was going there to actually see. Plus, I walked around the streets for 10 minutes just to get somewhat of a sense where the Beach Boys grew up. So that was a fun first stop. Now, LA wasn't really a big part of my trip. I was only there for 1 night. It was more of just a place for me to recover, get some sleep after the flight, and eat some tasty Mexican food. And smoke some legal cannabis. How fun that America, some parts of America, it's totally legal to do that. So that's cool. As I was walking around Hollywood that evening, I found myself searching for the members of the Beatles stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but I couldn't find them. But then as I visited the exterior of Capitol Records, I noticed that their 4 names are literally the first you see directly outside the building's former main entrance. So that answered that question. If you're ever in LA, that's where they are. Oh, I also saw an ungodly amount of those awful Tesla Cybertrucks. Just hideous looking vehicles. Before I ditched LA though, I did go to see the Hollywood sign because I'm, like I said, I'm a tragic for that stuff. Plus I also drove around Laurel Canyon listening to music from the likes of Joni Mitchell, The Byrds, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and other artists whose music echoed through the canyon back in the late 60s and early 70s, which was very cool. I also checked out the Hollywood Bowl from afar, the place that the Beatles played in 1964. Then on the way to Santa Barbara, I wanted to stop in Malibu because I'd always had the idea of swimming at Malibu Beach, but it was honestly not a very good beach, or at least not the part that I was at. There was like a bunch of rocks as soon as I got into the water, and they just kept going along the shoreline, so that didn't last very long. The first major stop was in Santa Barbara with a couple of family friends. It's this boomer couple made up of a retired literary agent and an artist, which is why the house looks so colorful and funky. I always really enjoyed talking to this couple because they were literally students in California during the Berkeley riots in 1968, and so had a front row seat for this pivotal time in history that I idolized so much for its music and its sense of change in the air. They were there living amongst it and have like written about it in books. The guy I was staying with, David Obst, has literally written a book about America in the 60s and 70s. But after 2 days in Santa Barbara, I was back on the road, and I'm just going to quickly add that after Santa Barbara, I stayed one night in Cambria just to recover. It's a long drive. Now, my original plan was, let's get a map up here. My original plan was to drive straight up Highway 1 along the coast, the Pacific Coast Highway. But for almost a year, there's been a blockage right in the middle of Highway 1 as you drive up between Cambria, where I was staying, and Monterey, which is where I was headed. The blockage is due to ongoing erosion, making the route unsafe, cliffs collapsing and that kind of thing. It was meant to be cleared months before I arrived in the States, but was still an issue by the time I got there, which is kind of says a lot about the future of Highway 1 in general. Is that even going to be a feasible drive in future? Either way, I had to pivot my plans, meaning I had to take the far less scenic route through North Highway 1, which is more inland, until I got to Monterey, where I then drove down as far south as I could go before the road blockage. And as much as this threw a spanner in the works and meant that the drive was slightly less scenic and longer, I was still able to check out almost all the major spots along the coast that I wanted to see in this part of the California coastline that is called Big Sur. And yes, the Beach Boys also have a song about Big Sur.
Cashmere hills filled with evergreens under Big Sur sky, and that's where I belong.
In fact, I was listening to a lot of Beach Boys on this leg of the trip. They provided the perfect soundtrack, of course, as well as all the other thousands of songs about California. The road being blocked did suck, but I was blessed with incredible weather. Often this area can get super overcast and foggy, but I had near constant clear skies to see the gorgeous colors of California's nature, the breathtaking bends of the coastline, the enchanting woods of Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park, ending with a picturesque sunset viewing of McQuay Falls with its 80-foot waterfall that empties directly into the ocean. If you hadn't caught on, I'm a huge nature junkie. I love hikes. I love being out amongst the land and seeing nothing but trees and wildlife around me. I guess that's why I have such appreciation for the more nature-loving Beatles of George Harrison and Paul McCartney. Then it was one quick night in Monterey, and I was heading east to Yosemite National Park. It's about a 3-and-a-bit-hour drive. As I am a huge Apple nerd, I became aware of the beauty of this place not through Ansel Adams' stunning black and white photography, but instead through the various macOS software updates over the years, featuring the magnificent photographs of the gigantic granite rock formations that people come from all around the world to see. And they had when I was there. It was like a mini UN in Yosemite. I was also there to see the giant sequoias and mighty redwood trees that have captured my imagination for years. If you want to know the difference, the sequoias are more dense and like wider, but they don't grow as tall as the thinner ponderosa pines of the redwoods. We have a fairly small redwood forest in Melbourne that's always busy because it's the only place you can see these trees in like the whole state. So being amongst them in their natural environment was really breathtaking. Oh, and if you're a fan of climbing or documentaries, you may also recognize El Capitan, aka the largest granite rock formation on Earth, and the summit that free climber Alex Honnold scaled without a harness in the documentary Free Solo. He's the only person in the world who's ever done that. And let me tell you, looking up at this behemoth and imagining climbing any section of this without, or even with a harness, had my legs shaking. Like, that guy is actually insane. But look, Yosemite, incredible. A real highlight of the trip. I highly recommend visiting if you are into nature and just beautiful. It's just a beautiful place to be, folks. And as I was heading out at sundown on my last day in Yosemite, I saw a bear. Don't worry, I was in my car, but I was so blown away that a full-on bear was just chilling right outside my car. Sure, we have like snakes and spiders in Australia, but you guys have fucking bears, man. Like, what? Another cool bonus was that in the town that I was staying in just outside Yosemite called Mariposa, I saw a band play a set at a bar and they were really good. They're called Skywaymen, and you should check out either of their last two albums. That's what I've listened to so far. I had them playing in the car as well as I drove to my next destination. Yeah, they really helped to soundtrack my trip, so go Skywayman. Then I was back near the coast over in Cupertino in Silicon Valley, where my first stop was the Apple campus, where I could only visit the store, unfortunately, whereas if I was still working for Apple retail, I would have been granted a full tour. Oh well, I did cop a pretty cool t-shirt though. I made the obligatory visit to the childhood home of Steve Jobs, where in that garage, he and Steve Wozniak made the very first Apple computers. I also just loved driving around the neighborhood of Palo Alto, just an unbelievably beautiful neighborhood. Like, I get why all the tech billionaires live here. It is like the kind of streets that you see in the movies. It's like, wow, that's someone's idea of suburbia. It's that. But I stayed in Sunnyvale, which is a more affordable, but still very expensive and lovely area made up of these super cool Eichler homes from the late 50s and early 60s that were inspired by the architectural style of Frank Lloyd Wright. So with atriums, so you've got a bit of the outside on the inside and these like beams that go through the house in order to support these floor-to-ceiling windows. Very cool, very mid-century modern. Loved that. The Airbnb that I was staying in was hosted by this older French lady in her 70s who was just so cool. She was a sculpturist by trade and, you know, a really proud vegan. She'd been living in California for the last 30 or 40 years or so, and she and I stayed up for like 3 hours on the night that I was there, just talking about America, the state of the world, music, art, politics, drugs, whatever came to mind. I was so actually sad to leave because I really felt like we connected. And yeah, but I had a flight to New York in a couple of days and still had San Francisco to go. So I got back in my car and left the valley for foggy San Francisco. I actually drove across the Golden Gate Bridge, but it was the one part of my trip with bad weather and you just couldn't make out anything. Oh well. This was also where I was returning my car, meaning the remainder of my trip would be on foot or by train. I'd also heard San Francisco had gone downhill since COVID, with a lot of its more bustling metropolitan areas shuttering their stores due to the expensive commercial real estate costs. But I stayed in the Castro, which was a lovely area and fairly close to a lot of the spots I wanted to check out. One of those was Haight-Ashbury, which in 1967 was the epicenter of the hippie movement. Famously, the place that George Harrison visited, expecting it to be filled with these creative types, making things, practicing spirituality in order to make the world better. But it was instead, in his words,
and it was just full of horrible, spotty, dropout kids on drugs.
But still cool to see nonetheless. Bass player Phil Lesh, who played for the legendary San Francisco band The Grateful Dead, had actually died only a couple of days before I arrived in San Francisco, and walking up to the Grateful Dead house around the corner, people had left all these bouquets of flowers to honor his memory, which was really nice to see. San Francisco is still really beautiful to me. The architecture everywhere you go is insanely cool. In a world where it feels like everything's being made to look like the cheapest carbon copy of everything else, it was just really fantastic to visit a city where no two houses look the same. And yes, San Francisco did not disappoint when it came to Halloween decorations. Oh, I also found this rad vintage Paul McCartney tour shirt from 1989, but alas, it was far too small for me. An activity that I really loved was getting a little high and visiting the Museum of Modern Art, or MoMA. I was last there when I was 12 years old and it had a really big impact on me. I had never seen modern art before and it really expanded my horizons as a child, so it was really wonderful to make a return trip 21 years later. One of the true highlights was an exhibition called The Visitors by Ragnar Kudnason. It's actually the same dude who put on the exhibition that I mentioned in my last video with Yoko Ono's single plum floating in perfume served in a man's hat. Wild that he's come up in back-to-back Patreon bonus videos. Anyway, The Visitors is a 1-hour audio-visual piece where in a large dark room, there's 9 big screens all around depicting different rooms inside an actual house. So this big old house, and all these rooms have an instrument and someone playing that instrument. So a cello, a couple of guitars, a piano, an accordion, and some singing. There's actually also a backing choir takes up one of the screens, and they all sing this song that goes for like an hour, this huge piece. And as you walk over to a certain screen, you can hear, if you want to hear more of the accordion, you can go over to that, or more of this harmony from this hand, because they're singing and playing often at the same time. Or you can stand in the middle of the room and just get the best, surround experience possible. It's like, how they say Dolby Atmos is like, you're in the music, it's happening all around you, you're experiencing it. That literally was this exhibition. It was really, really cool. One of the most incredible audio experiences I've ever had before. The way it ends is they all come together on the one screen, sing together, and then walk off into the sunset. It's really beautiful. I only had one full day in San Francisco, but I made sure to stay for that entire hour that exhibition was on, because it was just so incredible to see. One of my favorite exhibitions I've ever seen. Anyway, then I was off to New York City. Finally, I was flying over to New York. And New York is just one of those places where as soon as I hop on the subway, I just instantly feel at ease. I just feel super comfortable there. It was my third time there. I've just always loved the energy of that city, the vibe. I was staying in Brooklyn for most of my time there, which worked really well for me. I was sharing an Airbnb with an interior designer near Greenpoint, up the north part of Brooklyn. And my bed was just in this tiny, tiny loft, but hey, that's New York. It's expensive to live there. My first day there, I headed to Central Park to check out the aforementioned autumn leaves, the fall colors, and they were really out on display. An absolute feast for the eyes. Truly beautiful. I then headed west from Central Park to the Dakota. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Dakota is one of the main settings of the film Rosemary's Baby, but I'm sure to this crowd of folks, you'll know it as the home of John Lennon in New York City, and the location where he was gunned down in 1980. Being at the Dakota is always a really surreal experience, because you are just there, you're in the exact spot where John was shot, and it's just wild. I was just kind of standing there taking it all in, and there's people all the time walking past, asking the security guard, does Yoko Ono live here? Was John Lennon shot here? And he's just always being yes, no, she lives upstate now, or wherever she does. Yeah, Yoko doesn't actually live in the Dakota anymore. She's so old. I think she needs a bit of extra care, and I think it's still owned by the Lennon estate, but just a crazy place to visit. Beautiful building as well. Now, Central Park, it was beautiful, but the park I enjoyed more was Prospect Park, designed by the same person who designed Central Park, but it's way less touristy. It's in Brooklyn, so it's a bit further out, but it's got these parts that are more wild looking. It's all intentionally placed. Every tree there is intentionally placed, but it's made to feel like you're in a forest somewhere. So I really love that. I also had a couple of meetings while I was in the US because of now what I do. That's also one of the small bonuses or reasons why I went to the US, was to meet with a couple of people that wanted to see me because of now what I do on YouTube. Not for anything super official. For example, the first meeting I went to was with Captured Tracks, who is the record label for the band The Lemon Twigs. Now, unfortunately, the Twigs weren't in New York. They were on tour and our schedules didn't line up, so I didn't get to meet them in person. I did get to meet their cardboard cutouts though, which was fun. I forgot to mention, I also did my first man on the street interview with Captured Tracks' social media team. They made it look like it was, just by happenstance that they bumped into a guy to talk about indie music with, but no, this was all pre-planned. I'll just play it now. You may have seen it on Instagram.
Do you think you have good music taste?
I mean, I hope so. My kind of living is dependent on my music taste, so I like to think that I do.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a YouTuber. I talk about music, a lot of it more of 60s vintage, 70s vintage, but I also talk about modern artists as well.
So do you like indie music?
I love indie music. It's the backbone of my music taste. If it's not Beatles or Beach Boys, it's probably going to be indie music.
Have you heard of Captured Tracks?
I have heard of Captured Tracks. Yeah, they are the label of one of my favorite artists.
Who's the artist? Who's your favorite artist from Capture Tracks?
That would be the Lemon Twigs. I absolutely adore those two guys. I think they're making some of the best music today. Yeah, I'm obsessed.
Do you have a favorite Lemon Twigs song or album?
I'm gonna have to go with When Winter Comes Around because it's the first Lemon Twigs song I ever heard off my favorite album, Everything Harmony. I made a video on it. It's on YouTube. You can check it out as well. I kind of go through it and tell you why it is so good, because it really is one of the best albums of the 2020s, I think. Capture Tracks, you're doing the Lord's work, you're keeping indie music alive, and yeah, I love everything that you do. Keep at it. So yeah, that was a bit of fun. But everyone else at Capture Tracks was really lovely. They told me how much they loved my video on Everything Harmony, how much it really helped the Twigs, which was nice. A couple of them really tried to convince me to move to New York, which at the time I was like, oh, maybe. But then I was like, no, that's insane. I can't move to New York. I have a dog. What are we talking about here, guys? But I don't know. Nice to know I have some like industry adjacent people in my corner if I ever do decide to move to America. It did make me realize though that like if you do want to be part of the action of like what, you know, where the events are taking place, you do have to move to America. New York, especially, like right now, there's the Beatles 64 premiere going on in New York, and you know, people that I met on this trip, Rob Sheffield, Skylar Moody, they're just there at the premiere, and it's like, man, I probably could have copped a ticket. I probably could have been sitting right near Paul McCartney, but that's what happens when you live in Melbourne, Australia. And then it was finally Halloween, so I made my way to Ditmas Park which is a suburb of Brooklyn, which people were telling me have all these like crazy decorations. This one specific house that is known as like the Halloween house in Ditmas Park. So I went to that, and it was like bustling. There was kids everywhere. We were wearing these costumes, and even earlier in the evening where I was just in the neighborhood and like seeing all these kids trick-or-treating in all these like elaborate costumes, it felt like I was in a movie. Like there was so much effort into how they wanted to look, and so much joy in the streets. There was like, I heard the Monster Mash and Thriller like a million times. It just, yeah, it really felt like I was in a movie. It felt like I was in a movie amongst all these like extras for this Halloween scene. Really cool. I then headed into Manhattan to check out the vibe there and saw a bunch of cool costumes, and there was also a parade, but it all ended up being too crowded, and I headed back to my Airbnb. Now, I'm also a musical theater fan, or just a fan of theater in general. That's what I got my degree in performing arts. And last time I was in New York in 2016, I saw the musical Hamilton, just weeks after it had won all those Tony Awards. So it was like the best time to see Hamilton, and then it became my like personality for the next year. This time I saw Hadestown, which won Best Musical at the Tonys in 2019, and was the first show that I remember getting any kind of real buzz after Hamilton. It was pretty good. It was okay. I gotta be honest, the entire first act took me a while to warm up to, but it had a strong ending, and then the second act was, I think, much better. It is just one of those stories, Eurydice and Orpheus, that is like, you can kind of sum up in 2 sentences, whereas Hamilton takes like it spans just decades, and they had to stretch out this story into this full musical. I think also that like the style of music that was used throughout most of the show, which was like this American traditional mixed with this like mid-2000s emo pop punk kind of thing. I don't know, it didn't super gel with me just from a taste perspective. I think my real major issue with it was that I really just didn't like the protagonist, Jordan Fisher, as Orpheus. I don't know if it was the actor or the role, or his style of singing was just so unbelievably grating to me. But look, don't listen to me, because there were hordes of young musical theater fans who were going nuts after him. Like there was this point in the show after the curtain call where he like pointed at the audience, and there was this like crowd of kids like towards the back that were like letting out Beatles screams. It was nuts. Anyway, the better show, in my opinion, was definitely Oh Mary, a truly hilarious play by the incredibly talented Cole Escola about Abraham Lincoln's wife and his assassination. It's a comedy, and I am actually not going to say anything more about it because I don't even know how to talk about this show, but I will say it had me laughing harder than I have in a long time at any piece of theater. Truly hilarious, fantastic stuff. Oh, and I was also in New York for the marathon, the NYC marathon, which I didn't even realize like how much, like I saw people on the train that morning with like signs, and I thought there was going to be like a protest somewhere, but no, people were just like going to cheer people on in New York City. And I was told by my host that it was, it's going to be really like big this year. And he said that because there's so much tension and everyone's attention has been on this election and people just need a release from that. They just need to go and cheer on some victors. And that's what it was. And it was fantastic. Like everywhere you went, there was like DJs and bands. It's that real kind of American spirit that is kind of special to that country. Like we like to cheer on our sportsmen and women in Australia, but in Australia we do, and in England as well, we just don't have that same kind of like go and achieve your dreams, go and win kind of attitude. It's very much like that. We call it tall poppy syndrome, where as soon as someone starts like to trying hard or, going for gold, going for ultimate victory, it's just, we cut them down. We're like, oh, why are you doing that? Why are you trying? But Americans, you really love that. You unironically are just like, yes, do it. You can do it. You can win this. Go, keep running. Yeah, it was just really heartening to see. I really enjoyed. I was like, maybe I should run the New York City Marathon. Like it was that effective. I also checked out the Whitney Museum for the first time, which was really cool. And as I hinted at just before, I caught up with a few Beatles content creators. There aren't any Beatles content creators in Australia, as far as I know. There's just me. But there's quite a few in New York. Not on like the YouTube side of things, but on TikTok and Instagram. There's a couple of people who I caught up with. One I was excited to catch up with was her name is Brooke. You may have seen her on TikTok. I think she just goes by Brooke on TikTok, so maybe I won't say her last name. But she has a lot of great takes on like Beatles lore and history. It's also just really funny, has really good insight into, things like McLennan and these like fan theories and that kind of thing. A very enjoyable content creator, I would say. We also tried to get into the John Mulaney Chapel Roan episode of Saturday Night Live, but to absolutely no avail. And also, you may have seen this person, Skylar Moody, wanted to take me out to lunch, which was cool. I didn't really know Skylar's stuff online that much. I'd seen her, I'd seen her videos around, just a few Instagram videos I'd seen. But yeah, she was very eager to catch up. And yeah, it's just a fun way to meet other people who are also very online about the Beatles. It was cool to just be like, oh, you talk about this as well. That's fun. I don't know anyone else who talks about this online as much as I do. So yeah. I actually stayed with a Beatles content creator in my last 2 nights in New York, my last 2 nights on the trip, Jack Lawless. That name might not ring a bell for one of his affiliations, which is running the Twitter and Instagram page Beatles Earth, but you may instead know him for his terrific Beatles podcast Here, There and Everywhere, where he has on a different guest who is often, but not always, related in some way to the Beatles, be it through music, books, fandom, journalism. He had me on for a couple of times. He also had on Rob Sheffield, one of my favorite authors, who wrote one of my favorite Beatles books, Dreaming the Beatles, and covers them on Rolling Stone. And then Jack was cool enough to get me and Rob on for a couple of joint episodes where we talk about the solo music of Paul McCartney and also George Harrison. And then for this trip, because Rob also lives in New York, the 3 of us caught up for a beer on my last night there. It was going to be a more victorious night, I think, but given the state of the election, everyone was feeling a bit somber. But it was a nice distraction to talk to someone I greatly admire in the journalism space, in the music journalism space. But yeah, that's me and Rob Sheffield and Jack Lawless, and it was a really nice way to finish the trip. Rob actually he's just released a book on Taylor Swift, the first kind of major book on Taylor Swift's music. It's called Heartbreak is the National Anthem, How Taylor Swift Changed Pop Music Forever. Cool book, definitely recommend it. And Rob is just a sweet, lovely guy, one of the oldest people still around at Rolling Stone, but I think that's just because he's been able to adapt to the way that the industry and journalism have changed. So yeah, that was really worthwhile for me. But America, what do I think about it? What was my impression? Well, like I said, I've already made various impressions over the years of America. I still love being there, honestly. I know some people are like, oh, I couldn't go to America. It doesn't seem like a very safe place to be right now. But like, let's be real, especially if you look like me, a white man, vaguely in his 20s or 30s, you're gonna be fine. And particularly in places like California and New York, I wasn't in Alabama, I wasn't in Arkansas or anything like that. But yeah, there's definitely been a shift since the last time I was there. The way tech has, I think, gotten out of hand a bit. We don't know where we're going with tech, and I really witnessed that when I was in parts of California. It's like, I don't know, the whole Elon Musk faction of, social media right now is like not great, and, you do kind of see elements of that. Like, when I was in New York, I wanted to get this photo of the Flatiron building, but I couldn't really anyway. It had all this construction over it and the sun was behind it. But right in front of the Flatiron building, in a really tasteless way, were these giant blow-up figures of Jake Paul and Mike Tyson, because that dumb fight between them on Netflix was premiering in a few days. And I was like, oh man, boy, I guess this is as much of America as the Flatiron building is. You know, there is beauty and there is also just absolute garbage. But I really stuck around for the beauty this time, and there is a lot of beauty still in the States and a lot of reason to be there, a lot of nice, lovely people. They are very loud, but there are still some very soft-spoken Americans that I definitely met also, because there's always the joke, like if you're in any place that's not America, you can always hear an American tourist coming because their voice just carries that. Yeah, but when you're in America, you realize that, like everywhere, everyone's different, everyone has different backstories and different hopes and dreams and desires. There's a lot of opinions, everyone's very opinionated, but that's great. We want America to do well. I want America to do well. You're a place that I've always, I keep saying you're, but it's because most of the people that are patrons and YouTube subscribers are American. It's just the way my numbers shake out. It's the way most people numbers shake out, because the population in America is hundreds of millions of people and the population in Australia is like 30 million people. So I don't know what's going to happen with America, where you're going over the next few years. I'm very curious about it. I'll be watching very closely. But no, I had a great time. I would go back. I know it's like, I'll probably give it another 4 years, but if the opportunity came up, I would definitely come back to America. Yeah, it's a wild and wonderful place to be. Thank you to many of you who replied on, I think it was Twitter, about places I should go, if I should do this or do that. You helped me make a few decisions when I didn't have a lot of time in a certain place, so I appreciate that. And yeah, I hope you found this interesting. Obviously, not all of it was related to the Beatles or music or the stuff I normally talk about, but it's a little insight into who I am and how I like to spend my time when I'm not doing this. So hopefully that was cool. Let me know in the comments what you thought of it, and I guess we'll probably get back into normal programming for the next Patreon bonus video. Now here's the part of the video where I tell you what's coming up on the YouTube channel, and there is a bit coming up. I know still it's been a month since the last Patreon video and no YouTube videos have appeared on the channel. What's going on? Well, I've been overseas, that's why. Actually, this company has sent me the Beatles US box set, this vinyl box set that's been released in conjunction with the Beatles 64 documentary. So I have to actually make a video about that. They were like, you should make a video in 3 days after receiving the box set. And I was like, well, if you want a good video, it's not going to be made in like, I'm a Beatles YouTuber. I'm not a Beatles TikToker. I can't just make something that quickly. Update, they didn't actually send me the box set. They sent me instead like just the loose vinyls, not in the box set, and notably missing the album The Beatles Story, which it was a US release that kind of told the story of, you know, the Beatles, where they came from and everything, because there was no real way of knowing that in 1964, 65. So that album is exclusive to the box set and I don't have it. So they have not sent me what they said they were going to send me. They just sent me just the loose vinyls. So I don't think I'm actually going to end up making a video on this. I'll still make a video on the documentary, but yeah, maybe it's because I'm from Australia and it costs more money to ship a box as opposed to just the loose vinyls. But yeah, I don't know, weird, man. Then I've actually got a little Zoom meeting with people from Midas Man, a movie that I saw in August, but I realized still hasn't come out in the US. It's come out on Prime in the UK and maybe other places, and I'm sure if you've wanted to see it in the US, you've probably got the means to find it. But yeah, as of yet, it actually hasn't had a US release date, which is really funny. So they want to talk to me about the upcoming worldwide release of Midas Man, and I was going to make a video on Midas Man anyway, but now we'll see what they want out of me. I did say, like, I am not going to be critical, so we'll see if that's okay. Like, you know, if they just want me to talk about like Midas Man is great, they've got the wrong guy, even though I did like the film, but you get what I mean. So I don't know when my Midas Man video is going to be out. I would say it's probably not going to be December. I would say it's probably January, unless these people really need it to be out in December, but I might push back on that because I want to make it good. The video that I want to finish up with by the end of the year is the pop music video that I've been teasing. So that's coming. And then, of course, the Ringo one as well, which I desperately want to start editing very soon. And one on the A Complete Unknown as well. So lots to come out very soon. Yeah. And again, the camera died. So yeah, lots of good stuff coming. Hopefully plenty by the end of the year. And yeah, thanks for watching this one. Thanks for being patrons. Even during this time without a lot of YouTube videos. I'll talk to you all very soon. Bye.